I found out I'd been raising my sister's daughter for 6 years, believing she was mine, while my own baby had been given up for adoption. I grew up as the daughter nobody really wanted, not in the dramatic movie-style way where parents scream about regretting your birth, but in that quiet, suffocating way where you're just consistently treated as less important than your sibling. My younger sister, let's call her Diana, was born when I was 3 years old, and from that moment on, I became background noise in my own family. My mother adored Diana. I'm talking about the kind of devotion that borders on obsession. Diana got the bigger bedroom, the nicer clothes, the birthday parties with 20 kids and a bounce house. I got a card and maybe dinner at a chain restaurant if I was lucky. When Diana joined soccer, my mother went to every single game with signs and snacks for the whole team. When I made honor roll 4 years straight, I got a pat on the head and a reminder not to get cocky about it. But the real problem wasn't just the favoritism, it was Diana herself. My sister was a bully, plain and simple, and she knew exactly how untouchable she was. She'd steal things from my room constantly. Little things at first like hair ties and pencils, then bigger stuff like books I'd saved up to buy or birthday money from our grandmother. When I complained, my mother would sigh and say it was normal sister behavior, that I should learn to share. Diana would stand behind her, smirking at me with those innocent eyes she'd perfected. The bullying got worse as we grew older. In middle school, Diana started spreading rumors about me at school. She told everyone I had lice, that I didn't shower, that I stuffed my bra. Kids can be cruel, but when your own sister is leading the charge, it hits different. I'd come home crying, and my mother would tell me to develop thicker skin. My father would retreat to his workshop in the garage, avoiding conflict like it was his full-time job. High school was when things escalated to actual violence. Diana had gotten popular by then, ran with a crowd of kids who thought being mean was the same as being cool. She'd trip me in hallways, accidentally spill drinks on my homework, once even locked me out of the house in winter for 3 hours while my parents were out. But the incident that finally got my mother's attention happened during my sophomore year. I was standing at my locker between classes when Diana and her friends approached. I should have known something was wrong by the way they were giggling, but I was tired and just wanted to get to class. Diana came up behind me with a lighter, an actual lighter. She held it up to my hair and tried to set it on fire. I smelled the burning before I felt the heat, and I spun around so fast I knocked her hand away. Only a few strands caught, but the intent was clear. That finally did it. A teacher had seen the whole thing, and suddenly my mother couldn't sweep it under the rug anymore. For the first time in 15 years, she actually defended me. She threatened to call the police if Diana ever touched me again, grounded her for 2 months, and seemed genuinely shaken that her precious daughter had tried to light me on fire in a school hallway. You'd think that would be a turning point in our relationship, that maybe my mother would start seeing Diana for who she really was, but within a month, things drifted back to normal. Diana learned to be more careful about getting caught. I threw myself into my studies after that. If I couldn't be the loved daughter, I could at least be the successful one. I took every AP class available, stayed late for study groups, did everything I could to build a future far away from that house. During my junior year, I got a part-time job at a local accounting office, filing papers and making coffee at first, but eventually learning actual bookkeeping. The owner, this stern woman in her 60s, saw something in me and started teaching me the ropes. Every paycheck went straight into a bank account that only I had access to. My mother didn't even know it existed. By the time I graduated high school, I had $3,000 saved up. It might not sound like much, but to me, it represented freedom. Those bills were proof that I could take care of myself, that I didn't need them. Diana, meanwhile, had barely scraped through high school. She'd spent more time at parties than in class, and her grades showed it. But did our mother care? Of course not. Diana was planning to go to community college and become a nurse, and that was enough to make her a hero in our mother's eyes. The summer before I left for college, Diana made one last play for control. She broke into the lockbox I kept in my closet and stole $500 in cash I'd been keeping for emergencies. I came home from work and found my room trashed, the lockbox forced open and empty. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I walked straight to Diana's room where she was lying on her bed scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me with that same smirk she'd been giving me our whole lives. "Give it back," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Give what back?" She examined her nails like she was bored. "The $500 you stole from my lockbox. I have until tomorrow to report the theft to the police. Your choice." Something in my tone must have warned her that I wasn't bluffing this time. Her smirk faltered. "You wouldn't. Try me. I have my bank statements showing deposits. I have my manager at work who can verify my savings. I'm 18 now, Diana. This isn't kid stuff anymore. This is actual theft, and I will press charges." My mother appeared in the doorway then, probably drawn by the unusual silence more than any noise. For once in her life, she actually looked at me, really looked at me, and saw someone who was done playing games. "Diana, my mother said quietly. Did you take your sister's money? Diana's face went red. I was going to pay her back. When? I asked. You don't have a job. You've never had a job. You were just going to keep it and hope I'd forget. For the first time in my life, my mother took my side completely. She made Diana give back every single dollar, all 500 of it, from some stash she'd been hiding in her closet, from various birthday gifts and money she'd manipulated out of relatives. My mother even apologized to me, actually said the words, "I'm sorry," while tears ran down her face. But it was too late. I'd already checked out emotionally. I thanked her politely, took my money, and started packing for college. I'd gotten a full scholarship to a state school 6 hours away, and I couldn't wait to leave. College was freedom. Real, breathable freedom. I lived in the dorms my first year, got a campus job at the library, and actually made friends. Real friends who didn't use me or steal from me or light my hair on fire. For the first time in my life, I could be myself without constantly looking over my shoulder. I could leave my belongings in my dorm room without worrying they'd be destroyed or stolen. I could share accomplishments without someone immediately trying to diminish them. My roommate, a girl from Colorado studying biology, became my first real friend. We stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, shared meals in the dining hall, studied together in the library. Simple things that other people took for granted felt revolutionary to me. I joined a book club, started going to campus events, even tried out for an intramural volleyball team, even though I'd never played sports. I was terrible at volleyball, but nobody mocked me for it. They just laughed and helped me improve. The normalcy of it all, the basic human kindness, was almost overwhelming. I dated a little, nothing serious, just learning what it was like to have people actually want to spend time with me. Learning that I could be liked for who I was, not just tolerated or actively targeted. That's where I met Mark. It was at a house party during my junior year, one of those crowded, too loud events where you can barely hear yourself think. I was in the kitchen getting water, trying to pace myself, when this guy struck up a conversation. He was charming in that easy, confident way. Tall with dark hair and this smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We talked for hours that night, ending up on the back porch long after the party had died down. He was studying engineering, wanted to work for a firm that did sustainable building design. He asked about my major, accounting, and didn't make the usual boring jokes. He actually seemed interested. We started dating after that. It was good, really good. He met my friends, I met his. We studied together, went to movies, did all the normal couple things. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone had chosen me first, not as a backup, not as the less attractive option, but as their first choice. By senior year, we were serious enough that we talked about the future, marriage, kids, where we wanted to live. I was careful not to rush things, not to push, because part of me was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Mark seemed genuine, seemed like he really loved me. When I got pregnant during our last semester, I panicked at first. We weren't married, weren't even living together yet. But Mark surprised me. He proposed immediately, said he'd been planning to anyway, and this just moved up the timeline. We graduated, had a small wedding with just a few friends, and moved into a tiny apartment across town from my parents. I didn't invite Diana to the wedding. I'd barely spoken to her since leaving for college. My mother begged me to reconsider, said family should be there for big moments. But I held firm. Diana had spent our entire childhood making me miserable. She didn't get to be part of my happy ending. The first 2 years of marriage were honestly perfect. We had our daughter, this beautiful little girl with Mark's dark hair and my eyes. I went back to work part-time once she was 6 months old, and Mark's career was taking off. We moved to a bigger apartment, started saving for a house. Life felt stable and safe in a way it never had before. When our daughter turned 2, I caught Mark texting another woman. It was late at night, I couldn't sleep, and his phone kept lighting up on the nightstand. I picked it up thinking it might be work, something urgent, and instead found a string of messages with someone from his office. Flirty messages, nothing explicitly sexual, but definitely crossing lines. I confronted him the next morning. He cried, apologized, swore nothing physical had happened and that it was just stupid attention-seeking behavior. He said he'd been stressed about work and money and had made a terrible mistake. He begged me to forgive him, to think about our daughter, to give him another chance. I wanted to believe him, or maybe I just wanted to not be a single mother. Maybe I didn't want to admit that my marriage was failing just 2 years in, that I'd chosen wrong again. Whatever the reason, I forgave him. We went to a few sessions of couples therapy, and things seemed to get better. For the next 4 years, our marriage seemed solid. Mark was attentive, present, involved with our daughter. I got promoted at work, managing a small team at the accounting firm where I'd started as an intern. We bought a townhouse in a decent neighborhood with good schools. On paper, we had everything. During this time, I even tried to reconcile with Diana. Maybe it was becoming a mother myself, or maybe I was just tired of carrying around all that resentment. I started inviting her over for Sunday dinners, letting her build a relationship with her niece. Diana had gone to nursing school and was working at the hospital across town. She seemed to have grown up, seemed less focused on competing with me. Mark supported the reconciliation. He said family was important, that our daughter should know her aunt. Diana became a regular presence in our home, coming over at least once a week. She'd play with our daughter, help with dishes, act like a normal, supportive sister. I actually started to think we'd turned a corner, that maybe adult Diana was different from teenage Diana. I was an idiot. 3 months ago, I came home early from work. One of my team members had called in sick, and I'd stayed late the night before to finish a project, so my boss sent me home at noon to make up for it. Mark's car was in the driveway, which was normal since he worked from home 2 days a week. Our daughter was at preschool until 3. I walked into our bedroom to change out of my work clothes and saw Mark's phone on the bed, unlocked and opened to messages. I wasn't snooping, wasn't looking for anything. It was just there, face up, and the words on the screen made my blood run cold. Diana's name, messages about our daughter, and the switch at the hospital, and when are you going to tell her? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My vision tunneled, and all I could see were those words on the bright screen. Our daughter. The switch. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped my purse. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, my legs suddenly unable to hold my weight. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers and scrolled up. The screen blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. I needed to see. I needed to understand. Weeks of messages. Months, maybe. Sexual messages that made my stomach turn. Planning messages about maintaining the lie. About keeping me in the dark. Messages about how they'd fooled me for so long. How easy it had been. References to things that made no sense until they suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips. The room felt too hot, too small. I couldn't get enough air. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But the evidence was right there in my shaking hands, undeniable and devastating. I scrolled further back, reading message after message, each one another knife to the chest. They talked about me like I was a joke, an obstacle, someone too stupid to see what was right in front of her face. Diana called me Little Miss Perfect in one message, said she'd finally beaten me at something that mattered. Mark had responded with a laughing emoji. When Mark came upstairs 20 minutes later, I was sitting on the bed with his phone in my lap. He saw my face and knew immediately that it was over. How long? My voice came out steady, which surprised me. He sagged against the doorframe. Please let me explain. How? Long. He opened his mouth, probably to feed me another lie, but I cut him off. I've already forwarded these messages to myself. I have everything. The affair, the references to our daughter, the hospital switch. So you can either tell me the truth right now, or I can forward them to your boss, your family, and a lawyer who'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you and Diana did. Your choice. The blood drained from his face. His engineering firm had strict ethics clauses. A scandal like this would destroy his career, and he knew it. Since before the wedding, he finally whispered. I actually laughed. It was either laugh or start screaming, and I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. You married me while sleeping with my sister. It wasn't like that, it just happened. We were both drunk one night and, save it, tell me about the switch. His face went white. What? I held up his phone. Your messages mention a switch at the hospital where Diana works, the hospital where I gave birth 6 years ago. Tell me about the switch, Mark. The silence that followed felt like drowning. Mark slowly came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, I almost couldn't hear him. Diana was pregnant too. She got pregnant around the same time as you, maybe a few weeks later. She didn't tell anyone. She kept working through her pregnancy, wore scrubs that hid everything. When you went into labor, she arranged to be working that shift. My hands were numb. My whole body was numb. Keep going. She'd been planning it for months. She requested that specific rotation, made sure she'd be assigned to labor and delivery that week. When your contractions started and we came to the hospital, she was the one who checked you in. She said there were complications with your blood pressure, that you needed stronger sedation than normal. The attending physician was dealing with 2 other emergencies that night. Trusted Diana's assessment. She gave you extra medication, made sure you were completely unconscious and would stay that way for hours. He paused, his hands shaking. I said nothing, just stared at him with cold eyes until he continued. Diana went into labor herself about 2 hours after you did. She delivered in a private room on a different floor, told the staff she was a nurse dealing with an unplanned pregnancy, and wanted minimal documentation. Everything was chaos that night, understaffed, people running everywhere. When both babies were born, she just switched the ID bracelets. You were so sedated you didn't wake up for 6 hours. By the time you came to, the babies had been switched, cleaned up, wrapped in identical blankets. Newborns all look similar, especially 2 girls with dark hair. So the daughter I've been raising for 6 years, I said slowly. is actually Diana's biological child, yours and Diana's. He nodded, not meeting my eyes. And my biological daughter? His silence was answer enough. Where is my daughter, Mark? Diana arranged an adoption, closed adoption, through some private agency she knew. It all happened within 48 hours. Your parents thought you'd just had one baby. Everyone thought you'd had one baby. The paperwork Diana filed listed her as the mother for the adoption, so there was no way to trace it back to you. I stood up. Everything in me wanted to start throwing things, to scream and break down and make him feel even a fraction of what I was feeling. But instead, I walked to our closet, pulled out a suitcase, and started packing. What are you doing? Mark stood up, panic in his voice. Leaving? What does it look like? Please. We can work through this. We can go to therapy. I'll do anything. You stole my child. Each word came out sharp and cold. You and my sister stole my biological daughter and gave her away to strangers. You let me bond with another child for 6 years while my actual daughter is out there somewhere being raised by people I'll never meet. There is no working through this. There is no therapy for this. There's just you and Diana and the consequences of what you've done. I love you, he said, like that meant anything anymore. I know I messed up, but I do love you. Diana, she was exciting and she didn't expect anything from me like you did. She didn't care if I forgot to take out the trash or worked late or get out of my way. He moved. I finished packing, grabbed my laptop and important documents from the home office, and left. I drove straight to a hotel and checked in for a week. Then I sat on the bed in that generic room and finally let myself fall apart. I cried for hours. For my daughter, my real daughter, who was out there somewhere, being raised by strangers. For the 6 years I'd spent loving and raising a child who wasn't biologically mine. For the marriage that had been a lie from the very beginning. For the sister who'd hated me so much she'd orchestrated the cruelest possible revenge. For the parents who'd created this dysfunction in the first place. When I was done crying, I got angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger, but the cold, calculating kind that actually gets things done. I opened my laptop and started making lists. I needed a lawyer. I needed to tell my parents. I needed to figure out if what Diana and Mark had done was even prosecuted, if there was any legal recourse available. I needed to find my daughter. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. It was a Saturday, and I knew they'd be home. My mother answered the door with a smile that died when she saw my face. Something's happened, she said, ushering me inside. My father was in his recliner watching television. He muted it when he saw me. What's wrong? I told them everything. Every detail of Mark's confession, the affair with Diana, the switch at the hospital, the adoption. I watched my mother's face cycle through disbelief, denial, and finally horror. My father just sat there, mouth open, like he couldn't process what he was hearing. No, my mother said when I finished. No, Diana wouldn't. She couldn't do something like that. She did. Mark confirmed it. The messages confirm it. It happened. Maybe Mark is lying. Maybe he's trying to turn you against Diana to hide his own affair. Mom! I cut her off, my voice sharp. Stop. I know you love Diana more than me. I've known that my entire life. But this isn't about your feeling. This is about what actually happened. Diana stole my child and gave her away to strangers. Face it. My mother started crying. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Neither of them knew what to say, and honestly, I didn't care. I'd told them what they needed to know. What they chose to do with that information was up to them. I left shortly after, ignoring my mother's pleas to stay and talk. There was nothing to talk about. The facts were the facts. I had work to do. Over the next week, I met with 3 different lawyers before finding one who understood the complexity of my case. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 50s, explained that what Diana and Mark had done was potentially criminal, but very difficult to prosecute. The adoption had been legal on paper since Diana was listed as the biological mother. Proving that a switch had happened 6 years ago would require genetic testing, and was complicated by the fact that the adopted child was in a closed adoption. Still, she could help me with the divorce. The affair and fraud gave me plenty of grounds for a favorable settlement. Mark had already started calling and texting, begging to talk, but I'd blocked his number. Everything went through the lawyer now. My mother called me 3 days after our conversation. She'd tried to talk to Diana, she said, but Diana refused to admit anything. Diana claimed Mark was lying, that I was being manipulated, that this was all some misunderstanding. My mother wanted to believe her so badly. I could hear it in her voice, that desperate need to think that her favorite daughter wasn't capable of something so monstrous. I need to hear it from her, my mother said finally. I need to hear Diana admit it. She's not going to admit it to you, I said. She knows you'll defend her no matter what. But my mother wouldn't let it go. She called me every day for a week, begging for a chance to talk to Diana herself, to get to the truth. Finally, I agreed to set up a conference call, but with one condition. My mother wouldn't tell Diana I was on the line. She'd call Diana and record the conversation, and I'd be listening in silently. My mother agreed. 2 days later, I sat in my hotel room with my mother on speakerphone as she called Diana. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Part of me hoped Mark had been lying, that this was all some terrible mistake. But I knew better. Diana answered on the third ring, her voice cheerful but slightly slurred. "Hey, Mom." She'd been drinking. I could hear it immediately. "Diana, honey, I need to talk to you about something serious." A pause. Music thumped in the background. "Okay?" She was at a bar or party somewhere loud and distracting. "Your sister came to see me last week. She told me some things about you and Mark. Things I'm having trouble believing." "Oh, that." Diana's voice went hard. "She's just trying to turn you against me because Mark doesn't want to be with her anymore. It's pathetic, really." "So you're saying none of it is true? The affair? The baby switch? None of it?" Diana laughed. Actually laughed. "I mean, the affair is true. Mark and I have been together since before they got married. He only married her because she got pregnant and he felt obligated. But the baby switch? That's insane. She's just looking for someone to blame for her failing marriage." I closed my eyes, breathing slowly through my nose. Hearing her admit it so casually, like it was nothing, made me want to throw up. "But if you're having an affair," my mother said slowly, "doesn't that mean you might have gotten pregnant too?" "Sure, I got pregnant. Mark's the father. We have a daughter together. So what? Where is your daughter, Diana?" Another pause, longer this time. "She's with Mark and my sister, obviously." "Look, Mom, it's complicated, okay? My sister couldn't handle the truth about Mark not loving her, so we let her raise our kid. It keeps her happy and occupied, and it gives our daughter a stable home environment. Everybody wins." My mother's breathing was ragged on the line. "You switched the babies. You gave away your sister's biological child and gave her yours instead." "Oh God, she actually told you that part." Diana sighed dramatically. "Fine, yes, I arranged a private adoption for her kid. The whole point was to keep everything simple and clean. My sister got a baby to raise. I didn't have to deal with diapers and sleepless nights. And Mark and I got to be together without the complications of custody battles. It was perfect until she had to go and ruin everything by snooping through Mark's phone." "How could you do that?" My mother's voice cracked. "How could you give away your sister's child?" "Because I could." Diana's voice rose, filled with frustration. "Because for once in my life, I got to be the one who won. Little Miss Perfect with her perfect grades and her perfect job and her perfect life. She had everything handed to her just by being born first. Well, guess what? I'm prettier, I'm more fun, and Mark chose me over her. The baby switch was just the cherry on top." There was a long silence. I could hear my mother crying softly. "Mom?" Diana's voice softened. "Come on, don't cry. She's fine, isn't she? She got a kid to raise, she got to play house with Mark for a few years. She should be thanking me for giving her that much." "Diana," my mother said, her voice hollow, "I need to go." "Wait, are you actually mad at me?" "Mom, come on, you know I'm your favorite. You've always loved me more. You can't actually be taking her side on this." My mother hung up. I sat in the hotel room staring at my phone. The recording had captured everything. Diana's confession, her justifications, her complete lack of remorse. I had evidence now, real evidence that could be used in court if needed. But more than that, I had something else. My mother had finally heard who Diana really was. For the first time in our lives, she'd heard Diana without the filter of her own favoritism, without the rose-colored glasses. She'd heard her precious daughter brag about stealing a baby out of pure spite. My mother called me an hour later. She was still crying. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. You tried to tell me for years what she was like, and I never listened. I thought you were just jealous, or competitive, or making things up for attention. But you weren't. She's been cruel to you your entire life, and I let it happen. I enabled it. I made excuses for her." "Yes," I said simply. "You did. What can I do? How can I fix this?" "You can't. But you can help me with what comes next." My mother helped me find a better lawyer, someone who specialized in family law and had connections to private investigators. If there was any way to find my biological daughter, this lawyer would help me do it. My mother also paid for the lawyer's retainer, which was substantial. She also did something else. She called Diana and told her never to contact her again. She told my father the same thing, that if he wanted to stay married, he needed to choose a side and stick with it. My father, for once in his life, made the right choice. The divorce from Mark moved forward quickly. With the evidence of the affair and the recordings of Diana's confession, Mark's lawyer advised him to settle. He signed over the townhouse, agreed to child support even though the child wasn't biologically mine, and basically gave me everything I asked for. His career was tanking anyway because word had gotten out about the affair, and his company had very strict ethics policies. Diana tried to fight for custody once she realized Mark was giving the child to me. She claimed that since the girl was biologically hers, she had parental rights. But the lawyer I'd hired was worth every penny. She pointed out that Diana had deliberately given up those rights when she'd arranged to have the child raised by someone else, that she'd committed fraud by switching the babies in the first place, and that allowing her custody now would reward criminal behavior. The judge agreed. Diana lost her case. The child I'd been raising for 6 years would stay with me, though I insisted on therapy for both of us to deal with the complicated family dynamics. Diana was granted supervised visitation rights once a month, though she rarely exercised them. I think seeing me happy made her too angry to tolerate being around us. The DNA test confirmed what Mark had confessed. The little girl I'd been raising was biologically Diana's and Mark's. My own biological daughter was somewhere out there, in a closed adoption, with no way to contact her until she turned 18 and might choose to search for her birth parents. That thought kept me up at night. Somewhere out there, my daughter was growing up not knowing I existed, not knowing I'd been looking for her since the moment I found out she'd been taken from me. The private investigator was working on it, but closed adoptions are called closed for a reason. Unless the adoptive parents chose to make contact, I might never find her. I moved into my own apartment after the divorce was finalized. Something fresh and new, with no memories of Mark or Diana or the lies I'd been living. My daughter adjusted better than I'd expected. Kids are resilient like that. She knew Mark was her father and that he'd made mistakes, but I tried to keep the explanations age-appropriate. She didn't need to know the full ugly truth yet. That could come later when she was old enough to understand. My relationship with my parents improved dramatically. My mother came over every week, helping with my daughter, bringing groceries, just being present in a way she never had been before. She'd written a new will, leaving everything to me and cutting Diana out entirely, except for one symbolic dollar to prevent legal challenges. My father supported the decision. Diana tried to reconcile with them. She called constantly, showed up at their house unannounced, sent cards and letters begging for forgiveness. But my mother held firm. She'd been shaken to her core by that recorded conversation, by hearing Diana laugh about the cruelty she'd inflicted. I spent 30 years defending her, my mother told me one afternoon, while we watched my daughter play in the park. 30 years making excuses, choosing her over you, letting her hurt you because I thought she just needed more support, more attention, more love. But some people can't be fixed with love. Some people are just fundamentally broken, and no amount of mother's affection will change that. It was too little, too late in many ways. But it was something. 6 months after the divorce, Diana called me. Her number wasn't blocked anymore because my lawyer had advised that any contact from her should be documented. I let it go to voicemail at first, but she called 3 more times in an hour, so finally I answered. "What do you want, Diana?" "I need money." Her voice was small, defeated in a way I'd never heard before. "I need $5,000. Just a loan. I'll pay you back." "No, please." Mark left me. I lost my job at the hospital for ethics violations. I'm behind on rent, and I can't afford daycare anymore, and I don't know what to do. You should have thought about consequences before you destroyed my life. I'm your sister. Family is supposed to help each other. I laughed, cold and bitter. Family? You stole my daughter and gave her to strangers. You slept with my husband for years. You switched babies in a hospital out of pure spite. Don't talk to me about family, Diana. Mom won't talk to me. Dad won't talk to me. You're all I have left. Good. Now you know what it feels like to be completely alone. Now you know what it feels like when the people who are supposed to love you turn their backs on you. Enjoy it. I hung up while she was still crying. My father called me the next day. Diana had contacted him, begging for money, and he'd apparently mentioned that my mother had rewritten her will. He'd done it to explain why he couldn't help Diana financially, but it had backfired. Now Diana was calling him constantly, alternating between begging and threatening, demanding her fair share of the inheritance. "I didn't mean to make things worse," my father said apologetically. "It's fine, Dad." She would have found out eventually anyway, but it did make things messier. Diana started showing up at my parents' house at odd hours, pounding on the door and demanding to be let in. My mother got a restraining order. Diana violated it twice before finally backing off. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that Diana had moved to a smaller apartment across town, was working as a clerk at a retail store, and was struggling to make ends meet as a single mother. Mark wasn't paying child support. Something about a legal loophole since he'd signed away his rights in the divorce proceedings. I felt nothing hearing about her struggles. No sympathy, no guilt, nothing. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with them. The same way I was living with mine. Except my choices had been taken from me by someone who was supposed to love me. The private investigator I'd hired, an older man named Smith who'd been doing this work for 30 years, called me on a Tuesday afternoon almost 2 years after I'd first hired him. My heart jumped into my throat when I saw his name on my phone. "I found something," he said without preamble. "I can't promise it's your daughter, but there's a family in the northern part of the state who adopted a baby girl 8 years ago through a private agency. The timing lines up perfectly, and the agency matches the one Diana had connections to. Can we contact them?" Not directly, not without their permission. But I can put out feelers. See if they're open to contact with biological family. Some adoptive parents are, some aren't. You need to be prepared for them to say no. Do it. Whatever it takes, do it. There's something else, Smith said carefully. Even if they agree to contact, even if this is your daughter, you need to understand that she might not want a relationship with you. She's been raised by these people. They're her parents in every way that matters. You might get to meet her once, exchange letters, maybe maintain some minimal contact, but you're not going to get your daughter back. That's not how this works. I know, I said, throat tight, but I need to know she's okay. I need her to know that I didn't give her away, that she wasn't abandoned. I need her to know I've been looking for her. Okay then, I'll be in touch. I told my mother about the potential lead that evening. She cried, happy tears this time, and promised to pray for a positive outcome. My father just squeezed my shoulder and said he hoped I'd get the closure I needed. At work, I'd been promoted again. I was managing the entire accounting department now, with a salary that would have seemed impossible when I was a teenager filing papers. The owner of the firm, the same stern woman who'd hired me all those years ago, had become something of a mentor. She knew my whole story, and she'd supported me through every step of the divorce and aftermath. You're stronger than most people I know, she told me one day. Most people would have fallen apart, but you took the worst thing that could happen and used it as fuel. That's rare. I didn't feel strong most days. I felt tired and sad and angry at how unfair life was. But I kept moving forward because what else was there to do? I had a daughter to raise, even if she wasn't biologically mine. I had a career to build. I had a life to live that didn't revolve around Diana's cruelty or Mark's betrayal. My daughter was thriving. She'd moved on from first grade and was now in third, excelling in her classes. She still loved her teacher, had a solid group of friends, and seemed largely unaffected by the divorce in her daily life. Kids adapt, and I'd worked hard to maintain stability for her. She saw a therapist once a week, just to make sure she was processing everything in a healthy way, but the therapist said she was doing remarkably well. Sometimes I looked at her, now 8 years old with her father's dark features and her aunt's sharp intelligence, and felt this complicated mix of love and grief. I loved her because I'd raised her, because I'd been there for every moment of her life, but I grieved for the daughter I'd never known, the one who was out there somewhere calling someone else mom. Diana reached out one more time, about a year after everything had blown up. She sent a long email, apologizing for everything she'd done, claiming she'd been in therapy and finally understood how wrong she'd been. She said she wanted to make amends, that she'd do anything to earn back my trust and repair our relationship. I read the email twice, then deleted it without responding. Some things are too broken to fix. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive. Diana had spent our entire childhood making me miserable, and then as an adult, she'd orchestrated the cruelest possible revenge. She'd stolen my child and replaced her with her own, then laughed about it. No amount of therapy or apologies would change that. No amount of time would make it okay. She'd live with the consequences of her choices, and I'd live with mine. 3 months later, Smith called again. The family is willing to meet. They've agreed to a supervised meeting at a neutral location, just you and them and a family counselor present. They want to talk first before you meet their daughter, to establish boundaries and expectations. My hands shook as I wrote down the details. A coffee shop in a town halfway between us. 2 weeks from now. The adoptive parents would be there, and if the meeting went well, they'd consider letting me meet their daughter at a future date. I told my mother, who immediately started crying again. My father looked cautiously hopeful. My own daughter, the one I'd been raising, asked why I looked so nervous, and I tried to explain in terms she'd understand that I was going to meet some important people who might be able to help me find information about my past. The 2 weeks before the meeting crawled by. I rehearsed what I'd say 1,000 times. I didn't sleep the night before, just lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what my biological daughter looked like, what she was like, whether she'd inherited my love of reading or my terrible sense of direction. When the day came, I drove to the coffee shop an hour early and sat in my car, breathing slowly, trying to calm my racing heart. At exactly 11 o'clock, I walked inside. The family counselor was already there, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, and sitting across from her were 2 people, a woman in her early 40s and a man about the same age. They looked nervous too, which somehow made me feel better. "Thank you for meeting me," I said as I sat down, my voice surprisingly steady. The woman, who introduced herself as the adoptive mother, smiled tentatively. "Thank you for finding us. We've always wondered about our daughter's birth parents. We chose a closed adoption because we thought it would be simpler, but we've always been open to contact if the birth parents wanted it." Over the next 2 hours, I told them everything. About Diana and Mark, about the switch, about how I'd only discovered the truth 6 years after my daughter's birth. I showed them the legal documents, the DNA tests, the court records. I explained that I hadn't chosen adoption, that I'd been drugged and my child had been stolen from me. They listened, their expressions cycling through shock, horror, and sympathy. When I finished, the adoptive mother was crying quietly. "We had no idea," she said. "The agency told us the birth mother wanted a closed adoption, that she was young and couldn't keep the baby. They said everything was legal and above board." "It was legal," I said. "Diana was listed as the mother on all the paperwork, but it was also fraud. And I've spent the last year trying to find my daughter just to know she's okay." The adoptive father spoke for the first time. "She's more than okay. She's happy and healthy and loved. She's smart, likes soccer and reading, wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. She's 8 years old now, thriving in 3rd grade. She knows she's adopted, and we've always told her that her birth parents loved her very much but couldn't keep her." Something in my chest cracked open. "Can I meet her? Please? I'm not trying to take her away from you. I know you're her parents. I just need to see her, to know she's real, to tell her that I've been looking for her." They exchanged a long look. The counselor spoke up then, explaining that any relationship would need to be carefully structured to protect the child's emotional well-being, that introductions would need to be gradual and age-appropriate. After another hour of discussion, they agreed. I could meet my biological daughter in a park with both families present, with the understanding that how much contact we'd have going forward would depend on how she reacted and what she wanted. We set a date for 3 weeks later. When I told my mother, she actually smiled for the first time in what felt like months. "You're going to meet her. You're finally going to meet your daughter." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "What if she hates me? What if she blames me for giving her up?" "Then you'll tell her the truth. You'll tell her that you never wanted to give her up, that she was stolen from you, and that you've been searching for her ever since you found out. And you'll let her process that in her own time." The weeks before the meeting were torture. I found myself looking at every 6-year-old girl I passed on the street, wondering if she was mine. I dreamed about her constantly. Dreams where I'd finally meet her and she'd run into my arms, or dreams where she'd look at me with cold eyes and tell me she already had a mother and didn't need me. When the day finally came, I drove to the park with my mother beside me for moral support. The adoptive family was already there, sitting at a picnic table, and with them was a little girl with dark curly hair and eyes that looked exactly like mine, my daughter, my biological daughter. After 8 years of not knowing where she was, after 2 years of desperate searching, I was finally looking at her. I walked over slowly, my legs shaking. The counselor was there too, ready to facilitate and step in if needed. The little girl looked up at me curiously, not scared, but definitely cautious. She had dark curly hair that fell past her shoulders, and when she met my eyes, it was like looking in a mirror. The same green-gray color, the same slight upturn at the outer corners. She was beautiful. "Hi," I said, kneeling down so we were at eye level. My voice came out steadier than I felt. My name isn't important right now, but I'm someone who's been looking for you for a long time." She tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that reminded me of myself at that age. "Why?" "Because I knew you when you were a baby, and I lost you, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm okay," she said simply, with the straightforward honesty of children. "I have a mom and dad and a dog named Biscuit. He's a golden retriever, and he's really fluffy." I laughed through my tears. "That's really good. I'm so glad you're okay. What's your favorite thing to do?" She brightened immediately. "I like reading, and soccer, and I'm learning to play piano. My mom says I'm getting really good." The pride in her voice when she said my mom should have hurt, but it didn't. It meant she was loved, secure, happy. "That's wonderful. What kind of books do you like?" "Fantasy books, with magic and dragons and stuff. My teacher says I read at a 5th grade level even though I'm only in 3rd grade. "Wow, that's impressive." My throat was so tight I could barely speak. "I loved reading when I was your age, too." She looked at me with sudden interest. "Really? What was your favorite book?" We talked for over an hour, supervised by the counselor and her adoptive parents. She told me about school and her best friend Emma, and how she wanted to be a veterinarian because she loved animals. I told her about my job and about living in the city and about how I'd never stopped thinking about her, though I phrased it carefully, age-appropriately. She asked me why I'd been looking for her, and I took a deep breath before answering. Sometimes families are complicated. Sometimes people make mistakes, and children end up in different places than where they started. But I wanted you to know that wherever you were, someone was thinking about you and hoping you were happy. She seemed to consider this seriously. "Are you sad that you lost me?" The directness of children, their ability to cut right to the heart of things. "Yes," I said honestly, "very sad. But seeing you now, seeing how happy you are, that helps." When it was time to go, she hugged me spontaneously. It was a quick child's hug, nothing earth-shattering, but it meant everything to me. Her adoptive mother smiled at me with tears in her eyes. "We'll be in touch. We can arrange more meetings if she wants them." "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for taking care of her. Thank you for loving her. Thank you for letting me meet her." As I drove home with my mother, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Peace. Not happiness exactly, and certainly not closure, but peace. My biological daughter was safe and loved and happy. She had good parents who would protect her and help her navigate the complicated truth of her origins when she was ready. And I had my own daughter at home, the one I'd raised from birth, who needed me. She wasn't my biological child, but she was my daughter in every way that mattered. I'd fought for her in court, protected her from Diana's manipulation, given her stability when everything was falling apart. My life looked nothing like I'd imagined it would. I was divorced, single parenting, dealing with the aftermath of betrayal and fraud, but I was also stronger than I'd ever been. I had a career I'd built through my own hard work. I had parents who finally saw me and supported me. I had 2 daughters, even if one of them would never fully be mine. Diana lost everything. Her relationship with our parents, her career, her reputation, the man she'd betrayed me for. The last I heard, she was barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, dealing with the consequences of her own cruelty. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering. I just acknowledged it and moved on. She'd made her choices, I'd made mine, and we were both living with the results. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about what life might have been like if Diana had just been a normal sister, if we'd supported each other instead of competed, if she'd been happy for my successes instead of trying to destroy them. Maybe we could have been close. Maybe our daughters could have grown up as cousins who actually liked each other. But that wasn't our story. Our story was darker and messier and more complicated than that. Our story was about favoritism and cruelty and betrayal, about a mother who finally opened her eyes too late, about a sister who took revenge so elaborate and vicious it destroyed multiple lives. I was putting my life back together piece by piece. Dating wasn't on my radar yet, maybe wouldn't be for a long time. My trust in people had been shattered pretty thoroughly, but I was okay with that. I had my work, my daughters, my parents, my slowly rebuilding sense of self. The private investigator, Smith, became a friend of sorts. He said my case was one of the most complicated he'd ever worked on, and he was proud we'd gotten a positive outcome. Not everyone got to meet their biological child after a closed adoption. Not everyone got even the small amount of closure I'd found. You fought for her, he told me at our last meeting. Even when you didn't know if you'd ever find her, you kept fighting. That says something about who you are as a person. Maybe it did. Or maybe I was just stubborn. Maybe I was just too damaged by my childhood to give up on anything I cared about. Maybe I'd spent so long being the daughter nobody wanted that I'd become obsessed with being the mother someone needed. Whatever the reason, I kept moving forward. I showed up for my job every day. I showed up for my daughter every day. I showed up for therapy every week, working through the trauma and betrayal and grief. I showed up for my parents, letting them help rebuild the relationship we should have had all along. And once a month, I met my biological daughter in a park, supervised by her adoptive parents and the counselor. We'd established a routine, a comfortable pattern where I was part of her life without threatening her stability. She knew the truth now, in an age-appropriate way. She knew I was her birth mother, that I hadn't wanted to give her up, that I'd been looking for her. She still called her adoptive parents mom and dad, and that was okay. They'd earned those titles. But she'd started calling me by my name, had started opening up about her life and thoughts. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I'd imagined when I was pregnant 6 years ago, but it was something. It was more than I'd had before. My other daughter, the one I was raising, was starting to understand the full scope of what had happened. She knew her biological mother was my sister Diana, knew her biological father was my ex-husband Mark. She was in therapy working through those complicated feelings, but she still called me mom and crawled into my bed after nightmares and asked me to help with her homework. Blood didn't make us family. Choice did. Love did. Showing up every day did. One afternoon, almost 2 years after everything fell apart, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? It's Diana. I should have hung up. I'd told myself 1,000 times that I was done with her, that there was nothing she could say that would change anything. But curiosity made me stay on the line. What do you want? Nothing. I don't want anything. She paused and I could hear her breathing on the other end. I wanted you to know that I understand now what I did to you, how wrong it was. I've been in therapy for over a year, and my therapist helped me see how damaged I was, how much I hurt you. Good for you. My voice was flat, emotionless. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Really, genuinely sorry. And I'm glad you found your daughter. I heard through Dad that you've been meeting with her. I'm glad something good came out of all this. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that people could change, that Diana had finally grown into someone capable of empathy, but I knew better. I'd spent a lifetime learning that Diana only changed when it benefited her. I'm hanging up now, I said. Wait, just tell me one thing. The daughter you're raising, My biological daughter. Is she happy? For a long moment, I didn't answer. Then, she's loved. She's safe. She's going to grow up knowing that I chose her every single day, regardless of biology. That's all you need to know. Thank you, Diana whispered, for raising her, for being the mother I couldn't be. I hung up without responding. My mother asked me about the call when I told her later. How do you feel? I don't know. Empty, maybe? It's too late for apologies. Too much damage has been done. But I guess it's something that she finally understands what she did. Understanding doesn't erase the harm, my mother said quietly. I should know. I understand now what I did, how I failed you by always choosing her. But that doesn't erase 30 years of favoritism and neglect. No, I agreed. But you're here now. You're showing up now. That counts for something. It did count for something. Not everything. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to build something new. My life wasn't perfect. I had scars that would never fully heal. Trust issues that complicated every relationship. Moments where the grief of everything I'd lost hit me like a physical blow. But I also had moments of genuine happiness. Watching my daughter master a new skill. Getting promoted at work. Having dinner with my parents and actually enjoying it. Meeting my biological daughter and hearing her laugh. Those moments didn't cancel out the pain, but they existed alongside it. Life wasn't about choosing between happiness and sadness. It was about learning to hold both at once. Mark tried to reach out too, eventually. A long, rambling email about how sorry he was, how he'd lost everything because of his choices, how he wished he could go back and do things differently. I deleted it without finishing. His regret wasn't my problem. I chose to keep fighting. I chose to show up for my daughters. I chose to forgive my parents while maintaining boundaries. I chose to build a life that had meaning and purpose beyond the damage others had done to me. Was it fair that Diana got to live her whole life as the favorite while I scraped for every scrap of attention? No. Was it fair that Mark betrayed me with my own sister? No. Was it fair that I lost 6 years with my biological daughter? Absolutely not. But fairness was a childhood concept. Reality was messier and more complicated than that. Reality was about making the best of the hand you'd been dealt and refusing to let other people's cruelty define your story. My story wasn't over. I was only in my early 30s with decades of life ahead of me. Maybe I'd date again someday. Maybe I'd remarry, have more children. Maybe I'd stay single and focus on my career and raising my daughters. The point was that I got to choose. For the first time in my life, I was writing my own story instead of being a character in someone else's. Diana's story, on the other hand, seemed to be narrowing. Last I heard, she was still working retail, still struggling financially, still trying to get back into nursing school but facing barriers because of her previous misconduct. She'd made her bed, and now she was lying in it. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I just felt tired. Tired of carrying anger, tired of replaying what happened, tired of giving her any space in my head at all. She'd taken enough from me. She didn't get to take my peace of mind too. So I let it go. Not forgave, not forgot, but let go. I stopped checking on her through mutual acquaintances. I stopped wondering if she was okay or if she needed help. I simply removed her from my mental space and filled it with things that actually mattered. My daughters, my career, my slowly healing relationship with my parents, my therapy sessions where I unpacked decades of damage and learned healthier ways of being in the world, my monthly meetings with my biological daughter and her adoptive family, my own healing. That's what the rest of my life would be about. Not revenge, not justice, not evening scores. Just healing and moving forward and building something good from the wreckage. And somehow, against all odds, that felt like enough.